What's going on, everyone? Today is November 2nd of 2023, and welcome back to this, the 62nd edition of the Superstream. My name is Derek, author and webmaster of Gematrinator.com, and in today's video we're going to look at about 7 or 8 news stories from the past couple of weeks that have went down all by the numbers. We're going to kick today's video off by talking about news that broke last night for the death of Bob Knight, longtime Indiana Hoosiers coach at the age of 83. And we're going to talk about how that story connects to my most recent video on my YouTube channel on the death of Matthew Perry. In fact, 4 of the top 8 stories you're looking at connect to Matthew Perry in some way, and we will be discussing that at length. On the same day Perry died, a hockey player named Adam Johnson, former NHL player, died in England after a freak accident where an ice skate slashed his throat, and we're going to talk about how his numbers connect. A couple days later, actor Tyler Christopher, a soap opera actor, died at the young age of 50. He was formerly married to Eva Longoria, and we'll talk about how the Rangers' 5-0 win, Eva Longoria from Texas, is connected because they defeated the Arizona Diamondbacks, who have Evan Longoria on the team, And then we'll also talk about the Friends Fountain and how the removal of the fountain last year and the destruction of the set this year connects to the death of Matthew Perry. To round it out, we'll take another look at the Lewiston shooting, talk about how it connects to the Ali-Liston 2 fight, UFC partnering up with Bud Light despite their controversy, an attempted hijacking on an Alaska Airlines flight, as we've been in the midst of many 9/11 themes lately. And speaking of 9/11, we're going to wrap this video up by talking about the death of comedian Patrice O'Neal in 2011 and how his passing was a significant 9/11 riddle all the way back even 12 years ago. Now, if you're new to the channel, we focus on the component of Gematria, the simple letter numbering system. When compared with the calendar and ages, we find that something very odd is going on. This is an ancient Jewish Kabbalistic mystic practice. And when you pay close attention, it reveals something fascinating about our reality, which is that it appears as if we're living in some sort of mechanical realm, something that's perhaps computerized in nature. And these ciphers you're looking at are the main ones that we'll be using through all these stories, I should say. And note this Latin Gematria cipher, which is the only one I use that's not based in the current 26-letter alphabetic order. I actually believe this is the most significant one in the study. But once again, let's kick things off here by talking about the death of Bob Knight. Now, what's so fascinating about Bob Knight passing away? In my last video on the death of Matthew Perry, if you check the comments for that video, I actually had a little back and forth with I guess one of the characters from South Park, who talked about how prior to Matt Perry's death, he kept making these Instagram posts mentioning Matman, and how one of his last photos seemed to attribute the Batman symbol in the sky. So as a result of this, we're talking about, is it possible that Wayne Knight might die soon? And the connection here is obvious because Friends, that Matthew Perry starred in, was a famous sitcom in the 90s. According to some lists, it was the second best sitcom of the 90s behind Seinfeld. And Wayne Knight played Newman on the show Seinfeld. And this is a theme that my buddy Bobby, a longtime contributor to this blog and channel, also pointed out. On Dan Barron's blog, even before Matthew Perry died, a few days earlier, he's talking about how he was having synchronicities with Knight. The wrestler L.A. Knight will be fighting Roman Reigns in Saudi Arabia over in the Middle East this week. And, we're talking about all of this, and then a couple days later, Bob Knight passes away. And before Bob Knight coached the Indiana Hoosiers to 3 national championships, he was even the head coach for the Army Black Knights basketball team. So a heavy Knight theme going on here. I made a tweet the other day, or yesterday. I don't know what to call it now that it's on X. Perhaps the term excretion is appropriate, but either way, I made this yesterday showing how Bob Knight died a span of 160 days before the total solar eclipse that passes over Bloomington, Indiana, which is where the University of Indiana is located. Indiana University, I suppose. Both Indiana Hoosiers and Solar Eclipse have gematria of 160. And the last name Knight has matching 69 and 33 gematria with the word eclipse. Now, I don't do a lot of work on X, but if you're not subscribed, please do. It'd be nice to get more than 4 likes, but hey, I'm not complaining as long as the work is getting out there and people are raising their consciousness. But so there's more with this Wayne Knight connection that actually kind of blew my mind because, again, Bob Knight won 3 national championships for Indiana during his coaching tenure there. And the state of Indiana is perhaps the biggest state for high school basketball in the United States. And as a result, there was this 1986 film called Hoosiers about high school basketball in Indiana. And what kind of blew me away about this is that this film was shot in the city of Knightstown, Indiana. Knightstown, right? You get this Bob Knight coaching the Hoosiers, but even crazier is that Knightstown is a town in Wayne Township, Henry County, Indiana. So here we're talking about a potential riddle with Wayne Knight, and then Bob Knight dies. Hoosiers filmed in Knightstown, Wayne Township. So there's clearly a deep synchronicity here. And this is what we're talking about on this channel, is that no matter what you believe, whether you think that numerology equates to a conspiracy by the Illuminati, there's definitely something much deeper to gematria and numerology. And another perfect example of this, as we will see, is this death in hockey. The death of Adam Johnson, a former Pittsburgh Penguins player who was playing hockey in England when a freak accident occurred. His throat ended up getting cut by an ice skate, and he didn't make it. He passed away. Of course, the game was canceled. In fact, the whole league over there in England is on break now. Now, this is not the first time this type of injury has happened. However, it rarely does end up in death. And what's so bizarre about this is that the player whose skate hit his throat seems to have made some sort of reckless or exaggerated movement that could have been unnecessary. And, you know, I used to play hockey as a kid. As a spectator, it's hard to tell exactly. You know, saying there was any intent in this seems like a stretch, but it did seem a little bit reckless what happened. And again, this happened the same day that Matthew Perry died. And what blew my mind is that the man whose skate cut his throat was named Matt Petgrave. So he shares the same first name and the first 2 letters of his last name. All happening on October 28th. And a freak accident as well has been a term that they've used. And this is what we thought about Matthew Perry, right? Allegedly dead in a freak accident in his hot tub. Notice how the name Adam Robert Johnson sums to 75 in reduction, or Pythagorean gematria, which is the ordinal value of Friends. Dead on the same day as the Friends actor. The guy who killed him, Matt Petgrave, he was born on the 29th of January, or 29/1. Matthew Perry's full name, Matthew Langford Perry, equals 291. And Matt Petgrave was born a span of 29 weeks and 1 day before Perry's birthday in the year 1992. So all of the same digits in the reverse gematria here, showing up in his birthday and measuring to Perry's birthday. But here's where it gets really wild. Petgrave plays for a team called the Sheffield Steelers. Ice skates are made of steel. In the NFL, the Steelers play in the city of Pittsburgh. Adam Johnson played 13 games for the Pittsburgh Penguins in the 2019 and 2020 seasons. And as far as him playing 13 games, well, in gematria, Pittsburgh equals 130. Steelers equals 103. Penguin equals 103. Now, Matthew Perry, on the show Friends, played a character named Chandler Bing. Now, Bing stands out for a couple reasons. First of all, Perry died on the birthday of Bill Gates, October 28th. Bill Gates, the owner of Microsoft, or founder anyway, and Microsoft's search engine is named Bing. But if you think about famous people named Bing, the first person that pops up here is named Bing Crosby. And think about the name Crosby in connection to hockey, where famous Penguins player Sidney Crosby, 3 or 4-time NHL champion, plays for the Penguins, the same team that Adam Johnson played for. The name Adam Johnson has matching 114 gematria with friends. And if you saw my video on Matthew Perry, you saw that there was a deep Pearl Harbor riddle connected to World War. Bing Crosby also with this 114 gematria. The name Matthew Perry has matching ordinal gematria with World War II, 172. On the date that he died on the ice, hockey player Adam Johnson was 10,720 days old. Now, the name Chandler is actually French, which should come as no surprise since Perry's death was completely connected to France. In World War II, the liberation of France began with D-Day, and the Allied forces invaded Normandy from England. England, the same country where Adam Johnson was playing hockey when he died. Adam Johnson was born in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota has matching base gematria with Christmas. And again, the death of Matthew Perry also synced up with Christmas, Jean-Benet Ramsey, through his father, John Bennett Perry. Now, when the Pittsburgh Penguins played a day or two later, after the death of their former player, they had a moment of silence before the game, and the team they were playing against was the Anaheim Ducks, who play in the Los Angeles area, and Matthew Perry dead in Los Angeles. So a ton of syncs between these two news stories on the exact same day. And again, is this a conspiracy? Well, you can actually watch video of this guy getting his throat cut, and I definitely would not recommend it. I consider myself someone with a strong stomach, and it really bothered me. But it was something that really happened. And it wasn't staged, you know? So let's talk about the eclipse code and how this connects, because once again, the sun and the moon are integral to what's happening in our mathematical, computerized reality. In English Standard Gematria, the phrase total solar eclipse sums to 994. Adam Johnson was born in the year 1994 on the 22nd of June, the date written 22/6. Now, I mentioned this number in my Perry video because he and Matthew Perry both died a span of 2,260 days after the first Great American Total Solar Eclipse. Next year's eclipse on April 8th, but the first one was on August 21st, creating a cross over the United States. Using capital letters in a cipher called Capitals Mixed, which is based in the alphabetic order, but mixes in the capital letters with the smalls. Notice how the name Adam Johnson has matching 226 gematria with both Pearl Harbor and World War. In the Fibonacci method, the word throat equals 226 as well. In our trusty Latin cipher, eclipse is 192. Johnson's next birthday not only falls on the date leaving 192 days in the year, but that date would also have multiplicative numerology of 192. In the standard alphabetic order, the name Adam Robert Johnson sums to 192. Also notice the 96 as eclipse equals 69. In Latin Gematria, his full name sums to the 202nd prime number. Well, in ordinal, total solar eclipse equals 202. Johnson was born 19,190 days after Pearl Harbor. The number 1,331 equals 1919, and 1331 is the ultimate eclipse number. I talk about this in many of my videos. The name Adam equals 19. And there's another 1919 sync coming up. But the number 666 was huge here as well. Johnson used to play for the Penguins, which sums to 666. And notice how it said that he was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Well, Grand Rapids also equals 666. He had an upside-down 666 in his age, measuring from D-Day to the date he died. Now, although he played 13 games in the NHL, he only scored one goal during his time there. And that goal was scored in a game at Minnesota, which is interesting because Minnesota is where he was born. This game was played on October 12th of 2019. So this date here holds a lot of weight. If you measure from that date that he scored his only goal back to his date of birth, we find he was 313 lunar phases old exactly. This is the ordinal gematria of 603 score and 6, a number that was in Matthew Perry's age when Friends first aired. When he scored this goal, it was during Brown lunation number 1197. In Latin gematria, 666 equals 1197. And if you measure from his goal to his death, you get 211 weeks exactly. Well, 666 and ritual human sacrifice both equal 211. That's the 47th prime number. 47 was the number he wore for the Penguins and the number he was wearing when he died on the ice. The word beast equals 47. The four beasts are first described in Revelation 4:7. He was born in Minnesota. He died against Sheffield while playing for the Panthers. All of this equals 4 and 7. And what about the game where he scored his only goal? Pittsburgh against Minnesota. Would you believe the final score was 4-7? He also died 238 days before his birthday. Adam, Grand Rapids, and 666, all equal 238. The name Johnson has matching gematria with hockey, Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and 666. And from the first Great American Eclipse to his death was a span of 6 years and 69 days. The 9 is, of course, an upside-down 6. He also died exactly 669 sidereal months, or lunar orbits, after D-Day. The number 115 was also significant here, as it was with Matthew Perry. Also, Adam Johnson was born in the year 1994 on June 22nd. And what's so interesting about that is that the show Friends began in 1994 on the 22nd. So he was exactly 3 months old when Friends first aired. He scored his only NHL goal exactly 300 months and 3 weeks later. Similar to how D-Day was exactly 30 months after Pearl Harbor. Matt Petgrave, whose skate caused the deadly injury. Petgrave was 31 years and 9 months old, and of course this is a guy with the word grave in his name. Notice how the word killing has matching 319 gematria with Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And when you measure from Matthew Perry's birthday to Matthew Petgrave, you get this double 117, and that was a big number in my my last video, connecting to the Statue of Liberty riddle. So how wild, I mean, again, no matter what you believe about the death of Matthew Perry, whether it was a murder, whether it was accidental, whether it was fake altogether, none of that explains this real-life injury and how synchronicity lines up with it. And that's why I question what we were taught about gematria in the first place, right? because there's clearly something deeper going on a mystical or spiritual level, perhaps. Next story I want to touch on is the death of actor Tyler Christopher, who was best known for his time on a pair of soap operas, including General Hospital and Days of Our Lives. Now, we're going to skip the General Hospital connections, although it is worth pointing out that General Hospital has 666 Gematria. But we're instead going to talk about his connection to the show Days of Our Lives, as this was much more recent, from 2019, I believe. And strangely enough, the same time that Adam Johnson was playing for the Penguins in the NHL. So he died at the age of 50. His birthday was November 11th, which is the date that leaves 50 days on the calendar. And the number 50 stood out. Now, I actually made this post before Game 5 of the World Series last night. But wouldn't you know, the Texas Rangers won the World Series with a 5-0 score. Texas is where Tyler Christopher's former wife, Eva Longoria, was born. And notice how she was born in Corpus Christi, Texas. Well, Corpus Christi, Texas is where the 2023 annular eclipse from October just ended. That was the last city that saw the eclipse. So here we see Corpus Christi directly under the path of annularity for the October 14th eclipse earlier this month. Now, what makes this connection so insane is that there's a baseball player who has the male version of Eva's name, and that's Evan Longoria, very similar to Eva Longoria. And Evan plays for the Diamondbacks, who just lost the World Series to the Rangers. By the way, there's exactly 122 weeks between Tyler Christopher's and Eva Longoria's birthday, and his real name, Tyler Christopher Baker, has Gematria of 122. When he starred on Days of Our Lives, it was for 1 year, 2 months, and 20 days, and then he was replaced by a different actor. When he first appeared on Days of Our Lives, it was 52 years and 52 days into the show's run. And his character's name was Stefan DiMera, which sums to 52. The name Stefan DiMera also connects to Longoria and Days of Our Lives, but the name Eva Longoria, in the alphabetic order, this sums to 119. And again, Evan Longoria is in the Rangers Diamondbacks World Series. Notice how Rangers Diamondbacks sums to 119. Well, this year's World Series was the 119th edition of the World Series. Notice how Tyler Christopher, his birthday falls 330 days before Evan Longoria's. When he died, it was exactly 33 weeks after Eva Longoria's birthday and 3 weeks and 3 days after Evan's. 33 and 119, strongly connected to ritual human sacrifice, which equals 9/11, and has matching Latin gematria with the number 33. Longoria's current full name has matching gematria with ritual sacrifice and also sums to 116, that upside down 9/11. The name Tyler Christopher in Latin sums to 1098. This brings us back to Matthew Perry, who was born on the 19th of August, or 1908, and died on the anniversary of the Statue of Liberty, which equals 198 and 1908. He was born on a date with 115 numerology and died in connection to France, 115. Christopher's character on Days of Our Lives was named Stephen DeMera, which sums to 115 and 5'11". These found in the Gematria of killing. Christopher's real name has matching Gematria with Matthew Perry's character's name, 311. Now, 311 is the 64th prime number. Perry died on the date, leaving 64 days in the year. Matthew Perry equals 64. And then when Tyler Christopher died 3 days later, that date had numerology of 64. His death was also 22 weeks and 6 days before the second eclipse, whereas Perry died 2,260 days after the first. Furthermore, Christopher died 161 days before the eclipse. 161 is the ordinal gematria, the Latin value of Chandler and Los Angeles in multiple methods. 161. But here's where things get really interesting with this decode. When you look up the etymology of the name Chandler, as I mentioned earlier, this name is actually French, which makes sense because my last video explored the France riddles. But notice how this means candle or candle maker, candle seller. Well, this stood out to me because back in 2021 in December, there was a tornado that ripped through a candle factory. And that tornado happened at the intersection of the two great American eclipses. The storm line even followed the path of the second eclipse, from southwest to northeast. So this brings us back to this eclipse riddle that I just mentioned, right? Well, eclipse, eclipse of the sun, and eclipse the sun all have gematria of 69. Tyler Christopher's character, Stephen DeMera, sums to 690. And he died 690 days exactly after this eclipse at the candle factory. Now, what's also interesting about this is that the name of the candle factory was Mayfield Consumer Products, as it was near the city of Mayfield, Kentucky. So as a result, in my video, I explained how it was all connected to Baker Mayfield, who was the quarterback of the Browns at the time, and has now since moved around all over the league. And why is that interesting? Well, Tyler Christopher's real last name was Baker. Notice how Friends is a super match with Mayfield as well. The name Baker has double gematria of 98, both in Latin and reverse. Notice how Tyler Christopher Baker died 98 weeks after the Mayfield tornado. Now, whenever we look at Baker Mayfield, we have to understand that this man is a walking, living, breathing Ronald Reagan riddle. And why is that? Well, if you look at NFL football, the official NFL football is named after Wilson. Right? You get the Wilson NFL football. Why can't I pull up a picture of this? Here, the Duke, right? Wilson. It's right there on the NFL football. Baker's middle name was Reagan. Ronald Reagan's middle name is Wilson. Tyler Christopher Baker died 98 days before Ronald Reagan's birthday, and Ronald Reagan was born in Tampico, Illinois. And when you abbreviate Tampico, Illinois, you get a 98. So not only did he die 98 days before Reagan's birthday, but he also died 219 days before June 5th, which is the date that Ronald Reagan passed away in 2004. 2004, by the way, the same year that Friends ended. In fact, it was like a month earlier. Well, Christopher died 219 days before Reagan's death date. And notice how Tyler Christopher equals 219. And they say it was a cardiac event. Cardiac event 219. Remember, Chandler Bing died in California, 219. And that's interesting because Ronald Reagan used to be the governor of California. And what do you know? He was the 33rd governor of California. This is the number that I started my video of Matthew Perry on. By the way, another famous governor from California is Schwarzenegger. And notice how his name has the 219 in reverse. So the name Baker Mayfield and Baker Reagan Mayfield both sum to 112. Ronald Reagan was exactly 1,120 months old when he died, and he was born in Tampico, which equals 112. Well, Matthew Perry died exactly 1,012 weeks after Ronald Reagan. And it's been 112 years since Ronald Reagan was born. And now we get the death of Tyler Christopher Baker, whose name sums to 112. His ex-wife, Eva Longoria, has primary birth numerology of 112. But notice how Eva Longoria also has 40 birth numerology. Ronald Reagan was the 40th president of the United States. And let's do a little prime number chain here for you. The 40th prime number is 173, while the 173rd prime number is 1031, like October 31st, which is the date that Tyler Christopher died. And where was Christopher born? Illinois, the same state as Ronald Reagan. Joliet, Illinois sums to 611, his birthplace, like blood sacrifice. And Christopher was 611 months old when he died. He also had the 616 in his age, like ritual sacrifice, 616 and 73. He was born 7 years and 3 days after Days of Our Lives first aired. Finally, there's also a skull and bones riddle. He was born 3 years, 2 months, 23 days after Matthew Perry. So that's got the big 322, 223 set of numbers that we've been looking at all year. As Yale University, home to the Skull and Crossbones Society, just turned 322 years old in 2023. But notice how they were also born 1,180 days apart. The name Baker equals 118. Baker Mayfield, born 1,010 months and 8 days after Ronald Reagan. But Skull and Bones is also known as the Brotherhood of Death. Both death and homicide equal 118. And Days of Our Lives first aired on November 8th. The date written 118 or 11/8. His first appearance on the show was even 1 month and 18 days after November 8th. And then he lasted 1 year and 81 days. All right. So real quick on the topic of the World Series. I don't have a decode done on this yet. But you know, it's so interesting that I've been talking about Pearl Harbor in World War II in connection with the death of Matthew Perry. It seems a little bit obscure, but it does make sense when you see my video. Now, Pearl Harbor recently got a tribute in the World Series. I can't remember if it was Game 1 or Game 2. Yeah, it was Game 2. When a high school senior named Pearl Peterson sang the national anthem before Game 2. Pearl Peterson during the World Series. Well, 2 years ago in 2021, I made this blog post about a guy named Jock Peterson wearing a pearl necklace during the World Series. And this was a bizarre news story. When asked why he was wearing the necklace, he called himself a bad bitch. I was like, what's going on here? This guy walking around with a pearl necklace, calling himself a bad bitch. What an emasculating event. But hey, he's the one winning World Series, right? He's the one playing along with the script, so good for him. But yeah, 2 years later, we get this Pearl Peterson, right? Pearls and Peterson. I mean, come on. These are definitely clues to what played out with Matthew Perry. So before we stop talking about Perry's passing and the show Friends, I want to talk about one more element of this riddle that really struck me as interesting. The opening of Friends is one of the more popular openings in television sitcom history, I suppose. As you had this fun scene at the fountain, right, where they're all getting wet, big carefree, having a good time. But think of the irony here, as Chandler Bing ended up being found dead underwater. And his death even occurred during Scorpio, which is a water sign. His mother's real last name was Morrison. And remember, Jim Morrison also drowned under the sign of Cancer, which is another water sign. So there's definitely some deeper symbolism here. And I looked into this fountain a little more because last year, Warner Brothers removed the fountain from their ranch. And just 2 weeks before Perry died, they actually tore down this entire set and background at the Warner Brothers ranch. And there's a news article on this, talking about how during the summer this is all going to be torn down. There's your friend's fountain right there. Well, Matthew Perry was born in Massachusetts. How odd that just one day after he died, a drunk driver in Massachusetts slammed into a historic fountain and destroyed it. And there's video of this. Of course, it doesn't want to play now, but you can check this out on my blog. This guy just drives directly into a fountain. So this fountain also made an appearance on the show The Waltons. And in this episode of The Waltons, which it looks like it's right here, this episode takes place in the city of Paris, France. So there's another France riddle here. This episode is called The Premonition, which is odd because it seems to be hinting towards the future. And this episode aired on Christmas Day, December 25th. So once again, the death of Matthew Perry connected to France and Christmas. And now we find out the Friends Fountain was also featured in an episode from Christmas Day that takes place in Paris. What are the odds of this, right? So I thought a little bit more about this because this show was called The Waltons. And the Waltons are a famous family in Los Angeles where Matthew Perry died. Think about Bill Walton, who played his college basketball at the University of California, Los Angeles. In fact, he was part of the best college basketball team ever as they won, I think, 3 straight championships, 2 straight undefeated seasons. Walton would then go on to play for the Los Angeles Clippers during his career. And then his son, Luke Walton, played for the Los Angeles Lakers and was even the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers for a few years. So I was like, is there a riddle with the Waltons here? And of course there is. Bill Walton, born on November 5th or 11/5, which is like that birth numerology of Matthew Perry. The name Matthew Perry has matching gematria with Bill Walton. Luke Walton was born on March 28th or 328. And in Latin gematria, Los Angeles is 328. In fact, when he was born, his father Bill was 328 months old. Bill Walton played for the Los Angeles Bruins of college basketball. The Bruins. Now, the Bruins are a type of bear. In Major League Baseball, the Cubs play in Chicago, as do the NFL's Bears. Cubs and Bears, both in Chicago. Well, notice how Chicago, Illinois also sums to 328, like Los Angeles. And this connection is so deep. Think about how Los Angeles is home to the 213 area code, whereas Chicago, Illinois is home to the 312 area code. And in the same reverse caps added cipher, where the alphabetic order is flipped, 26 added for each capital letter. I mean, in the same cipher, these cities both sum to their dialing codes. And remember, after Kobe Bryant died in Los Angeles, the next All-Star game was hosted in Chicago. And that All-Star game in Chicago ended with a total of 312 points. Chicago, Illinois equals 312. All-Star equals 312. So where am I going with this? Well, Chicago is a city that sits on the 88th meridian. And earlier in October, I made this video on the death of Dick Butkus, who was born in Illinois, who went to college in Illinois, and then played pro football in Illinois. Richard Marvin Butkus and Richard Butkus both have matching 88 Gematria, with 80 the age he was when he died. The UCLA Bruins had a record 88 consecutive wins when Bill Walton played for the UCLA Bruins. Matthew Perry's full name equals 808. He was born in Massachusetts, which equals 808. And remember, his death was connected to Pearl Harbor and the Maui wildfires, which occurred on 808. Remember, the dialing code for Hawaii is 808. Perry died in Pacific Palisades 88, California 88. And I thought it was strange that all three female cast members of Friends have Gematria of 88. So does JonBenet Ramsey's mom. Luke Walton was born on the 88th day of a leap year, and the show The Waltons lasted 8 years and 8 months. Bill Walton's full name has matching Gematria with Dick Butkus's full name. How about that? 281 and 128. And again, these are like the digits found in Statue of Liberty. Or was it the Statue of Liberty? And the Statue of Liberty opened on October 28th or the 28th of October. The same digits found here. And remember, that's the date that Matthew Perry died. So let's get weird with this, right? Measuring from the birth of Matthew Perry to the final episode of The Waltons was 4,307 days. Bill Walton's full name in Gematria sums to 437 and 523 in both of the caps added ciphers of Gematria. Well, when Perry died, not only was Luke Walton 43 years and 7 months old, but that also equates to exactly 523 months old, the two numbers found in his dad's Gematria. Now, 523 is the 99th prime number. Matthew equals 99. Matthew Perry, 152. And Perry died 152 days before Luke Walton's birthday. I mean, what are the odds of all this? Matthew Perry was a Leo. The sign of Leo sits between 120 and 150 degrees of the ecliptic. Well, both Bill Walton and UCLA Bruins equals 120 and 150. Matthew Perry's full name has Gematria of 15 and 12, 105, 102. Dick Butkus died on 1005. Chicago, Illinois, 1005 with Fibonacci. Bill Walton was 10,005 days old when his son was born. But the real riddle with Leo is that Leo has Gematria of 32. Circle equals 32. 32 rays of the sun on the Jesuit emblem, which has the circle. And Bill Walton wore number 32 for UCLA and for almost his entire NBA career. And the name Walton equals 32. Luke Walton's full name is 302. Los Angeles, 320. Matthew Perry, 302. So this kind of feels like a curveball, but how can you deny that this is so synced up? And this really sealed it for me, this 437, 523. I mean, what is going on? I even ask, who would script something like this? Who would ever even see this? Except for some crazy person like myself, who is so mad with the world that he built a calculator to try to decode his own existence. All right, so if you're tired about hearing about the death of Matthew Perry, I have good news for you. I will not be mentioning his name for the rest of this video. I just think it's important to point out how all of these news stories from the same time frame sync up with one another. You know, all having to do with death. What does this say about the reality we live in? All right, so last week I made a video on the shootings in Lewiston, Maine. And I talked about how this was a skull and bones riddle connected to the Sandy Hook shootings, which were in Connecticut, where Skull and Bones is also located. After I made that video, a few people pointed out to me that Lewiston, Maine was actually the scene of one of the most famous sporting events ever. When Muhammad Ali knocked out Sonny Liston in the first round of their title rematch back in 1965. This was the first fight that Muhammad Ali participated in after changing his name from Cassius Clay. So, you know, he joined the black Muslims. And now think about how there's the big Muslim-Israeli war in the Middle East right now. So this all syncs up and makes sense. So I'm going to explain how the shooting in Lewiston, Maine was numerically synced with the Ali-Liston fight. And just think about it. Liston's first name was Sonny. This is all connected to the eclipse code and the darkening of the sun. A couple months ago, I did a video on the death of Jack Sonny. Check that out if you haven't already. The Ali-Liston fight in Lewiston was exactly 701 months before the Lewiston mass shootings. In the alphabetic order, boxing equals 71. Lewiston has the similar digits, 117. 117 is like the birthday of Muhammad Ali, January 17th. The name Muhammad Ali has matching 96 gematria with Freemason, and my video on the Lewiston shootings had an entire section on Freemasonry and how the numerology of Masonry was connected to this event. Now, the 96th prime number is 503, and after I made that video, they released the shooter's full name. And his full name, Robert R. Card II, is 503, just like solar eclipse. But think about the name Card, right? We're talking about boxing. A card is the list of matches that take place during a boxing event. And the shooter's name was Card. Now, what are the odds of this shit? Crazy. Now, of course, there was also a major Skull and Bones riddle. That was the bulk of the video. Skull and Bones, the eclipse code. Well, when you write out Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston, you get a reverse gematria value of 322. The 322nd prime number is 2137. From the Ali-Liston fight in Lewiston to the Lewiston shootings was 21,337 days. But you might be thinking, wait a minute, Derek, you nutcase, that's not the same number, there's an extra 3. Well, the number 337 is also relevant here. 337 is a star number. A star number is the same shape, or creates the same shape as the Star of David on the Israeli flag. And again, this all connected to the war between Israel and Hamas. The shooting at Sandy Hook was exactly 3,370 weeks after the founding of Israel. The United States even just turned 12,337 weeks old one day before that shooting. So skull and crossbones equals 223. The shooting in Lewiston was 2 months and 23 days before Muhammad Ali's birthday and 223 days before the anniversary of Ali's death. The 223rd prime number is 1409. And that's interesting because skull and bones equals 149. But 1409 is the standard gematria of the name Ali-Liston. And a lot of people believe he went down after a phantom punch, which equals 149. Now, Ali-Liston died 22 years and 230 days after Israel was founded. And now Israel taking control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip here in the year 2023. And make no mistake about it, I don't care what YouTube thinks of me. That shit in Israel was a false flag attack so they can move in and wipe out that land. There's no doubt about it. I commonly say that I shouldn't talk about what I don't know for sure, but no way does an organization that has Palestine's best interests in mind invade Israel in that fashion. It just doesn't, it would never happen like that. But Middle East politics, a very complex situation. So believe what you will. But let's talk more about this. To prove that Muhammad Ali is synced up with Israel, his birth name was Cassius Clay, or Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. Both of these names have gematria of 33. The shooter in Lewiston was named Robert Card, whose name equals 330, just like Ali's full name. Israel was founded exactly 330 weeks after the birth of Cassius Clay. The Sandy Hook shootings were in Newtown, and the number 1711 was big there because Newtown was founded in 1711. The shootings in Newtown happened 1,711 days before the first Great American Eclipse. There was a mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso 1,711 days before the second eclipse. And that's the 58th triangular number, and it's been 58 years since the Ali-Liston fight in Lewiston. And remember the shooting in Lewiston and the Sandy Hook shooting, both with 58 numerology. Cassius Clay, his full name, 75. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky, 75. Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, 75. Lewiston, Maine equals 75. So does Cassius Clay in reverse. And Israel was 75 years and 165 days old for the shooting in Lewiston. Cassius Clay also equals 165. There's even more to this. We mentioned a star number, 337, earlier. Well, the numbers 37 and 73 are both star numbers as well. And notice how Israeli equals 37 and 73. The word shooting equals 37. The Sandy Hook shooting happened when Muhammad Ali was exactly 3,700 weeks old. Now, if you multiply these two star numbers, 37 and 73, you get a product of 2701. The Lewiston shooting was exactly 2,701 days after the death of Muhammad Ali. And remember, 2701 is the gematria of the first verse of the Bible in Hebrew. Ali-Liston died 271 months after the founding of Israel. This was a number we mentioned in that video. Robert Card equals 271. The shooter, his birthday was the date that leaves 271 days in the year. The Sandy Hook shooter, Adam Peter Lanza from Newtown, Connecticut, both of those sum to 271. Star of David is 119 in gematria. The Star of David was established in Israel 6 years and 119 days after Muhammad Ali was born. The 119th prime number is 653. Sandy Hook equals 653. And now we get the shooter in Lewiston, Robert R. Card II, 653. And remember, guys, I made this video before his full name was released, talking about Sandy Hook 119. And now we get all these additional connections. Now you know why YouTube has suppressed this channel for so long. But I digress. Israel was founded on the 14th of May, 14/5. This was another number I mentioned in that video. Mass shooter has double Gematria of 145. And the shootings in Maine were exactly 10 years and 45 weeks after Sandy Hook, and exactly 1,045 days after an eclipse that occurred on the same date as Sandy Hook, 12/14. So there's a little bit more here, but I think you guys get the bulk of this riddle. Sandy Hook, Israel, the Ali-Liston fight in Lewiston. It all syncs up a little bit too well, doesn't it? All right, next up, I want to talk about Bud Light partnering back up with UFC and how this is all by the numbers. Now, you may recall that earlier this year, Bud Light controversially partnered up with Dylan Mulvaney, a trans media influencer. And as a result, Bud Light stock tanked. And I have mixed feelings on a story like that because, you know, you hate to see big companies push this whole non-binary agenda. But at the same time, the people who got hurt by that were employees who had nothing to do with the decision, right? And this is what Dana White is mostly saying with this new partnership, that, hey, Bud Light does good things. It's an American company. You know, the whole trans thing was a one-off, whatever. But when I dug into this, I started to realize this is all a numerical riddle. The collapse and return of Bud Light was all planned, apparently. Now, this all happened October 24th. And within hours of this deal being announced, the World Series began. And remember, this was the 119th World Series between the Rangers and Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks haven't been in the World Series since they won after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. The Rangers used to be owned by George W. Bush, who was the president during the 9/11 attacks. And then Bush threw out the first pitch, of course. George Bush was born in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale University is located, and he graduated from Yale as a member of Skull and Bones. Well, New Haven has Gematria of 1019. So does Ultimate Fighting Championship. And think about how Bud Light is owned by Anheuser-Busch. George Bush, the big Skull and Bones character in American politics. On the date of this announcement, Dana White was 19,811 days old. So you have the 9/11 somewhere in that age. But notice how Dana White was born 10,016 days before Dylan Mulvaney, the trans influencer. And here we have an upside-down 9/11. Remember, these stories all about division, 9/11, and the destruction of the divine feminine, 9/11. Now, back in 2017, UFC announced a partnership with Modelo, which at the time ended their deal with Bud Light. Now, that partnership was announced 9 months, 11 days after Dylan Mulvaney's birthday. And it was also 2001 days before the Dylan Mulvaney partnership was announced on April Fool's Day this year. So how about that? 9/11 and a 2001. UFC Modelo deal even has an upside-down 9/11. So 9/11 is the 156th prime number. Dana White was born on the date leaving 156 days in the year. Meanwhile, Dylan Mulvaney was born on a date with primary numerology of 156. This, the major eclipse number. Eclipses always occurring 1, 5, or 6 lunar phases apart. Gateway Arch equals 1506. And back in 2021, I did a number of posts about the Gateway Arch and how this is all connected to the arch eclipses of 2021, but also this ongoing trans riddle. The St. Louis Arch is in a park that, when viewed overhead, virtually mirrors the female anatomy. When you overlay the picture of the uterus over the park, it's almost identical. And it's right next to a river, right? The womb into the birth canal, the Mississippi River Canal right here. So there's a strong connection there with the Gateway Arch. St. Louis has gematria of 690, just like Eclipse, and the word woman equals 69. Dylan Mulvaney's partnership with Bud Light started exactly 69 weeks after the second Arch eclipse. And now, Bud Light is partnering with the UFC 690 days after that same eclipse. This partnership was also 2 years, 137 days after the first Arch eclipse. That first Arch eclipse was on June 10th. And June 10th was the same date that the Gateway Arch was inaugurated. And here we are with this 2137. We just talked about this number in my last video. This is the 322nd prime number. Dana White's full name equals 322. And the deal with Bud Light fell 322 weeks after the first Great American Eclipse. But notice how this deal also fell 20,590 days after the Gateway Arch was open to the public. This is the Latin gematria of Yale University, and the next story will mention this number too. Yale was founded on October 9th, or 1009. Record sponsorship deal 1009. And on the date 1009, on Yale's anniversary, back in 2017, is when the UFC announced its deal with Modelo. So it says October 10th, but the deal was announced the previous day on the 9th. So Yale was established in the year 1701. And this is interesting because Ultimate Fighting Championship has that gematria of 1019. And 1019 is the 171st prime number. The number 15 also has Latin gematria of 171. This deal fell 15 days after Yale's 322nd anniversary. Both UFC and Ultimate Fighting Championship equals 150 or 15. The 15th Fibonacci number is 610. We had an annular eclipse on 610, one of the Arch eclipses. Annular eclipse, 15. There's actually a deeper riddle with the crucifixion code that I won't get into. But notice how 15 also has matching gematria with Ultimate Fighting Championship. I definitely went full ham on this post. Dana White was 650 months old for this deal. 15 has matching gematria with White, 65, just like Dylan Mulvaney, 65. And, of course, Yale, 65 as well. So I mentioned in that last story, Yale University summing to 2059, right? So a couple weeks ago, we got this news story about a pilot who tried to hijack a plane. Now, this guy was not the pilot for this particular flight. He was supposed to be sleeping. Maybe it was a drug haze or something caused him to try to hijack the plane, which doesn't really make much sense. This whole story is very odd, but the first thing that jumped out to me was the flight number. Alaska Airlines flight 2059. And I'm like, no way. Yale University equals 2059. Yale University also equals 83. And the school was established on the date leaving 83 days in the year. This pilot is being accused of 83 counts of attempted murder. And remember, murder equals 83 in reverse. Back in 2015, there was another pilot who intentionally took his own airplane and flew it into a mountain. And that happened on March 24th, which was the 83rd day of the year. You may remember this Germanwings story, where the pilot was apparently depressed, so he killed himself and everybody on the plane. This is a story that immediately came to mind when I saw this, because here we have a pilot trying to hijack an aircraft from his own airline. This pilot's name was Joseph David Emerson, which sums to 202 in the alphabetic order. San Francisco equals 202, so does Everett, Washington. And this flight that he tried to hijack was headed from San Francisco to Everett, Washington. It's been 22 years since the 9/11 attacks, which of course involved airplanes. It was also 41 days after the anniversary of 9/11. And notice how Skull and Bones equals 202 and 41. Skull and Bones, of course, headquartered at Yale University. September 11th, also with 22 Gematria, just like the Brotherhood of Death and Total Solar Eclipse. This attempted hijacking occurred exactly 322 weeks after the first Great American Total Solar Eclipse. And here we go again, Skull and Bones, turning 322 years old at Yale. The name of the pilot, Joseph Emerson, has matching 322 Gematria with the World Trade Center 322. This also reminded me of an incident back in 2018, when a man named Richard Russell stole an airplane from the airport he worked at. This was also an Alaska Airlines flight. And Richard Russell was even from Wasilla, Alaska. Now here we have a story with another Alaska Airlines pilot. And it was a Horizon Air flight, but Horizon is actually partnered with Alaska Airlines. So this incident with Richard Russell in Seattle, that happened 202 months and 30 days after 9/11. This hijacking last week was 13 days after Yale's anniversary. And Skull and Bones equals 130, just like Germanwings. The Germanwings flight disaster connected. The Skull and Bones Society was founded in 1832. The pilot who tried to hijack this airplane, his name sums to 1831. Now, 1831 is the 282nd prime number, and Yale University was founded on the 282nd day of the year. The Brotherhood of Death, 282 in Sumerian. Germanwings, Flight 9525. Also with 282 Gematria. The Germanwings disaster happened on the date leaving 282 days in the year. That crash was exactly 706 weeks after 9/11, like Skull and Bones 76. It was also 194 days after the anniversary of September 11th, 2001. Both September 11th and 2001 are 194 in ordinal. Last week's attempted hijacking was 295 sidereal months after 9/11. 295 is the ordinal Gematria of 223 and 322. Skull and Bones Society, Skull and Bones, both 295. Airplane hijacking, 295. And this airplane hijacking was attempted on the 295th day of the year. Now, they had to make an emergency stop in Portland, which is interesting because that's really the one city in America where all these recreational drugs are legalized. And some people were speculating that this pilot was on magic mushrooms. Magic mushrooms has matching Gematria with Portland, Oregon. The Richard Russell stolen airplane story from 2018 also had some interesting numbers. That guy's name, Richard Bebo Russell, sums to 119. Portland has an upside-down 9/11 in it. Richard Russell was also called the Sky King, which sums to 190. He died exactly 1,900 days before last week's attempted hijacking. It was also 2 months and 12 days after the anniversary, and Seattle, Washington is 212. It was also 212 days after the anniversary of the Germanwings disaster. There's also an interesting pie riddle in here as well, which I won't get too deep into, but back in 2018, I made a post explaining how the Richard Russell story was a riddle connected to pi, as Richard Russell has matching gematria with pi in Latin. The main character in pi is named Parker, or the tiger, I should say. Richard Parker, Richard Russell. But there's more to it. Of course, Life of Pi, first published on 9/11/2001. So it all connects to this story from Seattle, of course. But this leaves us with one more story, and someone actually requested this in the comments a couple of weeks ago. And in this case, it's a story I did always want to decode. And given everything that's been going on with 9/11, Israel having its own 9/11 leading to the war with Gaza, it doesn't seem like it's a war with Hamas. It definitely seems like it's a war with Gaza, but I digress. I knew that the death of Patrice O'Neal was synced up to 9/11, but I never did any work on it. So, to wrap this video up, we'll talk about how this comedian, who was awesome, by the way, loved this guy. Unfortunately for Patrice, he spoke a hell of a lot of truth. So he had a limited ceiling with his career. And, maybe it was a health issue with Patrice O'Neal. It could be possible. The possibility exists that he was killed, but, for the sake of this decode, it's neither really here nor there. What you will see, irrefutably, is that Patrice O'Neal's death was connected to the 9/11 attacks in New York City. And Patrice O'Neal was born in New York City and died in nearby New Jersey. Now, what's important to understand is that he died in the year 2011. And in the year 2011, we had the beginning of a new Saros series. Saros series 156. This was the first new Saros in over 80 years, and we won't have another new Saros until the year 2058. So, while I typically only talk about total eclipses, with the occasional annular eclipse, the start of a new Saros series is very significant as well. And this Saros series started on July 1st of 2011. And this Saros series is numbered 156. Remember, eclipses always occur 1, 5, or 6 lunar phases apart. The Hebrew word for eclipse or deficiency sums to 156, just like eclipse the sun in English. And of course, the 156th prime number is 9/11. Patrice O'Neal died 152 days after the beginning of that new Saros series. O'Neal's full name has reduction gematria of 152. And in standard gematria, the word comedian, in reverse gematria, I suppose, comedian equals 152. The date he died had a life lesson number of 44. Notice how kill, comedian, and Beatles sums to 44. Why do I mention Beatles? Well, Patrice O'Neal died on November 29th of 2011, which was the 10-year anniversary of the death of famous Beatles guitarist George Harrison. And think about the date, the 29th of November, or 29/11. Here you get a 9/11 in that date. And Harrison died the same year as the 9/11 attacks. Notice how George Harrison and Beatles both have the same digits as this 152, which connects Patrice O'Neal to the eclipse code. Patrice was born exactly 358 sidereal months after George Harrison, and the name Harrison equals 358. Patrice would go on to die 358 days after his birthday. That date, his birthday, was December 7th. December 7th was the date of the Pearl Harbor attacks, which was really the greatest national tragedy before 9/11. The date, December 7th, has the digits 1, 2, and 7. And remember, during 9/11, it was buildings 1, 2, and 7 that were destroyed. The 9/11 attacks had primary numerology of 41. Pearl Harbor occurred in the year 41. Patrice O'Neal passed away at the young age of just 41. Using capital letters, his full name sums to 401. And Patrice O'Neal died 41 days after October 19th, when he first needed emergency surgery for a blood clot. His death was 10 years and 79 days after the destruction of the World Trade Center. And 179 is the 41st prime number, so a lot of 41 to go around. But here's where it gets overwhelming. In the alphabetic order, the name Patrice O'Neal sums to 119. In Latin, O'Neal is an upside-down 9/11. On the date of the 9/11 attacks, Patrice was 11,601 days old, which essentially has the same digits as 9/11/01, except with the 9 upside down. The World Trade Center first opened officially on April 4th of 1973. April 4th falls 119 days after Patrice O'Neal's birthday. And when he died, it was 14,119 days after that same exact date, April 4th of 73. He died of type 2 diabetes, which has an upside down 9/11. And the same year he died, Patrice O'Neal released his only full-length comedy special. In Latin Gematria, elephant in the room sums to 611, just like 9/11. Blood sacrifice 611. And if you measure from the release of this special on February 19th to the date of his death, it was 9 months, 11 days. In fact, that special was even released 9 years and 11 weeks after George Harrison died. And think about the date that he needed emergency surgery, right? October 19th, 10/19. Of course, that's very similar to a 9/11. I also just noticed how his special was 77 minutes long. In reduction, September 11th equals 77. So does World Trade Center. In Latin Gematria, World Trade Center sums to 1477. When Patrice O'Neal needed emergency surgery on October 19th, the World Trade Center was exactly 14,077 days old, or 2,011 weeks. And remember, ritual human sacrifice is 211 and 9/11. The World Trade Center fell on the date leaving 111 days in the year. World Trade Center, 111 in Sumerian. Patrice died 10 years, 11 weeks after the attacks. And his full name in Gematria sums to 1011. Now remember, the number 110 was also very important. Both towers were 110 stories, 110-meter antenna, destroyed on the 11th in the 11th state. Flight 11, Osama bin Laden, 911, Rockefeller, all 110. Patrice died 1 month and 10 days after his blood clot, and his death fell during brown lunation 1100. That's right, every new moon is numbered, and he died in the year 11 during lunation 1100 in the 11th month, 11 days before a total lunar eclipse. That eclipse in the middle of lunation 1100. This lunar eclipse belonged to Saros series 135. Notice how lunar eclipse equals 135 ordinal and 533 Latin. Patrice died exactly 533 weeks after the 9/11 attacks. The number 219 has matching gematria with the World Trade Center. Patrice O'Neal's special was released on 2/19, or February 19th, 2/19. Patrice O'Neal was named after Patrice Lumumba, whose birth name has ordinal gematria of 2/19. And then he died on the anniversary of the death of George Harrison, which sums to 2/19. Patrice was born a span of 2 months and 19 days before George Harrison's birthday. He and Harrison both died 2 months and 19 days after September 11th. Patrice O'Neal died at the age of 2,190 weeks. Finally, this is also connected to the World Trade Center bombing, which happened on 2/26. Crucifixion of Jesus and sacrifice are 2/26. Patrice's death fell exactly 2,260 weeks after construction began on the World Trade Center. Construction began on 6/8 of 68, the 6th of August. George Harrison would have been 68 years old when Patrice died. He also died exactly 680 sidereal months after his namesake, Patrice Lumumba. Of course, the 68th prime is 337. And in standard gematria, World Trade Center equals 1337. And New York City equals 2337. So, guys, do you think there's a 9/11 riddle here? I would definitely agree that it is. All right, guys. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Superstream. Hope everybody enjoyed it. As, of course, I believe these are the best decodes out there. But maybe my head is a little big. I don't know. I did not know a Beatles song was released today, so I'm definitely going to check that out because I am a Beatles fan. I'm one of those guys. But yeah, like I said, that was probably a lot for most people to watch in one sitting. I understand. I'm going to put chapters down below after this is all over so you can jump to any one of these stories. But there you have it, guys. Another day tumbling through the Matrix. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to y'all next time. See ya.